We're going to talk about the spacing utility classes, which are essentially going to help us when it comes to spacing, both when it comes to the padding and also margins. So first of all, let's go ahead and talk about the first utility class, which is going to be the spacing wrapper. Now, the wrapper is essentially going to be composed of two padding elements. So we have the first one, which is going to declare the direction of this element. So for example, if I set padding top, this refers to having padding on the top of the section. And then we're going to have the sizing class, which is going to establish the amount of padding that we are going to specifically have in that very section. So in this, if we mix padding top small, we're going to have some small padding applied at the very top. And if we apply padding bottom, medium, we're going to have medium padding applied at the bottom. Let's do an example of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some padding, let's say over here. I'm going to write in padding bottom, and I'm going to add padding huge. And as you can see, now we have this padding applied, which is 6 rem. Now, if I go back and examine the various versions that we have available, you can notice that we have padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. This should be pretty self-explanatory. It's one of these. But then we have padding vertical and padding horizontal. Now, what these two classes mean is that we're going to have padding equally set at the top and at the bottom for the vertical, and in case of the horizontal is left and right. So let's do an example of this. I'm going to write padding vertical, and I'm going to write again padding huge. As you can see, now we have padding on the top and at the bottom. And if we set it to horizontal, we would have the same padding set at 6 rem here and 6 rem on the right side. So now that we understand the basics of this section or classes, we can actually apply the same also to the margin. So it's going to be exactly the same as you can see here. The only difference is that instead of padding, you're going to write margin. So you can see that we can do margin vertical, and then going to write margin huge. And instead of the padding, which is on the inside as a refresher, we're going to have the margin set at 6 rem on both top and bottom of this element. Now, these are going to be the exact values in rem for each and every one of these classes. So I highly recommend you to check it out. So spacer small, it's going to be 1, and the same is going to be true for padding small. And then we are going to have increments, as you can see here, in minus or in plus. Now, the spacing block is essentially going to be a spacer divider. So if I go ahead, for example, and create a div right here, so I'm going to simply add a div, and I'm going to add the spacer, let's say XX large. You can see how we have this element set up as a spacer, and I can simply utilize this spacer as a wish throughout my project for various different reasons, if I just needed to create some space in between elements or even sections. So these are going to be all the spacers which you have available, and then custom, of course, you can create your own custom spacing. Now, when it comes to the content sections, you can see here that it helps to manage top and bottom padding for sections globally throughout the project. If we go and add this padding section and then we specify the size. So if you have a section that we need padding which is larger, I'm simply going to do a quick example over here. This is related to the sections again. So yep, let's go over here. Let's create this section, and you can see how I can actually apply the padding section larger, and this is going to essentially add the 8 rems top and bottom to this section and give it a basic style. So this is going to be specific for the sections. For all the other elements, utility classes for the spacing wrapper and spacing block. Now, another important thing to keep in mind is to create custom class to an element when it requires unique spacing that is not covered in the utility system. We're going to essentially utilize this practice. So has unique space, margin bottom, 0.75 rem. So the benefit of doing that is that the global spacing updates for the recurring element. It can include more styles, so it helps to avoid combo classes and overstacking, and it's easy to maintain without affecting utility classes. So that's another thing to keep in mind overall. Now, they also have some guides as to the spacing strategy. So first one is going to be the spacing blocks. So this is going to essentially, and the way it works is you add block between elements to add spacing. So again, what we discussed just a moment ago with and showed live with that div. You can set the spacer class with the size. Wrappers, you can add content inside the div block with spacing utility classes, which again, something that we discussed. And then you can add content inside wrapper with grid or flex styles applied. So also here we've seen how you can easily add these elements and divs to a grid in order to create some specific visual outcome. Then over here, this is going to be the actual application of these concepts. So you can see how this could work in a real life scenario. You can have these spacer divs essentially. And also over here, you can create the different padding and create specific layouts. And as well, for this element, we're going to have these grids. This is not as often used in this specific scenario, but definitely something to keep in mind. Here you can see how that looks within the navigator. So we have individual spacers, divs, or we have divs containing elements that we then apply one of these classes. Or again, we simply have the grid, which is going to contain all of it. So start experimenting with spacing, and one of the main reasons why you want to adhere to this specific philosophy of or strategy around spacing is to maintain a level of consistency throughout your project, which is really going to show in the details. Plus, it's going to be so much easier to maintain rather than creating unique classes for spacing or simply attributing specific margin or padding to individual one-off elements. So very efficient, very easy to use. And now we're going to move on to the very next